Hi again then guys, and welcome to another look back into the past of the Project Gotham franchise, once again to Project Gotham 4, for one of the most notable A-class vehicles in the game. One of the most notable supercars, not just in the game, but in the real world as well. And it's a car which hasn't been featured on that many games. In fact, Project Gotham was one of the only games to have it until relatively recently on Forza 6, where it was on there as well. If I recall, I think it was a DLC car. It's a great car on there, but the problem that the Caparo will often have, and this doesn't really affect the car on Project Gotham thankfully, but usually it's almost in kind of a no man's land. It's not allowed into Le Mans or F1 events for obvious reasons, but it's also often too fast or too high a category on a game like Forza for instance to be allowed up against many road cars. And the ones which it does tend to go up against will often have a whole lot more of a particular thing than this car has. For instance, it's the kind of vehicle that would be classified on a very similar level to something like a Veyron Supersport, or a Koenigsegg, or a Hennessy Venom GT, all of which are far, far faster, of course, in a straight line. Whereas this car isn't about that, it's about cornering. It really is an example of an F1 car for the road. And one of the best examples of that kind of tech, if you really want to break it down. And of course you could see that even from the Top Gear lap that this car put down, which absolutely annihilated every other street car on the grid, or on the list. Now, as far as performance goes, it's an incredibly fast car. 0 to 60 is about 2.5 seconds, not too surprisingly, and with a lower aero setting, it can even hit about 205 miles per hour, which is very good for a car with this kind of power. It doesn't have anywhere near the power of many of its rivals, especially in this game. In the A-class, it's one of the least powerful cars there, which is kind of ironic, given that it's still one of the fastest. Now, of course, one of the huge advantages that a Caparo has is its weight. It's such a lightweight vehicle, but unlike many of those kind of cars, like Ariel Atoms, Caterhams, Westfields, even something like an Elfin Clubman, or a Brook or a Van Wall, some of the less obvious choices, those cars typically don't go in to be purely as fast as possible. They're more so about being fast, for sure, but they're not trying to necessarily break records, they're trying to be very fun. Whereas the Caparo is completely set on just that. It's the fastest of its type. If you really break down all of the, especially open wheel style, which is technically what this is, track day specials, which again goes to stuff like the Caterhams and the Ariel Atoms and that sort of thing, and some less obvious ones like the Brooks and the Donkervorts and the Grinnell Scorpions. This is no way near the others. It's a whole step above, because the tech is so much more impressive. It's got a ton more downforce, a ton more grip, it's lighter than quite a few of them, and a lot more powerful than many of them also. Now, as far as the game goes, it's a formidable vehicle. And back when I used to play this game a lot more, with a buddy especially, we used to love comparing this one on a number of tracks to two other cars in particular. We always used to put it up against the Radical SR9 and the Toyota GT1, and that was a pretty good rivalry between the three. The Toyota would tend to dominate the more straight circuits, where it has smoother handling, but it's not quite as sharp, but it's more powerful in a straight line. Then you've got something like the Radical, which is a very good all-rounder, but in a similar way to the Caparo, not quite as strong for top-end performance, and the Caparo was a pretty good middle ground between the two. It had more of a benefit of straight-line speed, which often a full-on race car such as the Radical won't have, but it has far more grip and far more downforce than a road car, like most other supercars would typically have. And of course, for pure performance, that's a great place to be working at. It's a superb performance car, and if you put it on the right tyres and take it on a track, there's almost nothing that can outrun this. Even if you're talking stuff like the Gunpowder Apollo, the Ascari A10, various others in that kind of territory, even one of my favourites, the Mosler, they don't even come close. This car is a whole step above. It's like 5 or 10 seconds quicker than many of those cars on most tracks. And of course, the bigger the track, the bigger the difference you're going to see. Now, for practicality, it's a whole different ballgame, because in the real world, running a car that's this purely focused on its goal on the road is a very difficult thing, because at least stuff like the Ascari or the Gumpert or various others, even an Ariel Atom V8 for instance, it has a level of usability. You can use one on the street if you want to. Yes, it will be harsh and loud and not very fuel efficient, but it can be done relatively easily. With a Caparo, it's almost like road registering a Group C car or an ex-Formula 1 car. Technically you can do it, some people have, but it's just not exactly ideal, especially if you leave the mechanicals relatively stock, as far as you can at least, such as the stock steering rack. Now of course on a race car, and especially a Formula car, the steering rack is relatively shallow. They don't turn all that much because they don't need to, because the faster you go, the more downforce you have, and you can turn in much better. The problem with that is, on the road you're not going that fast, and the Caparo is kind of notorious for having a awful turning circle. It's something like 95 feet to do a full circle in this car when you're not going at speed. Whereas if you try to take that same circle doing about 100 miles per hour, it will turn it better. It won't do a full circle necessarily, but it will turn it a lot better because of having more downforce and more grip. And of course, once again, they mentioned that on Top Gear. They had issues with it unless you're really pushing it to its limit. It really is the essence of a professional, pure driving machine, and not just about being fun, but about being the best. The Caparo is the kind of car that you use if you want to destroy every other road car on the grid, and so that basically nothing but a full-on race car or a homologation special like the Toyota can even come close and, on occasion, beat it. Now, with that being said, this isn't a car that does the work for you. Not at all. It's a vehicle which can get squirrely sometimes. Again, you have to push it very hard to see the best results from it, and sometimes it can definitely feel, until you get into a rhythm with the car, that is, as you can kind of see in this video, the more laps that I do with it, the faster and the sharper it becomes. Because the car is far faster than you are, at least to begin with. The car can cope with being pushed far harder than you think it can, because you enter this vehicle with a certain mindset, especially if you've been driving other supercars. You know how hard you can push them, because most cars have similar parameters. Some are a little bit better, some are a little bit worse, but they're all fairly similar. But then you enter this car, it really is that completely different ballgame, and you have to learn to push the car further than you think it can go. If you do that, this thing is a formidable beast, and as far as the ratings go, I agree with them pretty much overall. They give it a 10 for acceleration, a 10 for braking, a 10 for grip. They do give it, once again, like the Panos, a 3 for drifting. I don't necessarily agree with those. I'd probably give it a 3 for drifting, but then change the grip to a 9, because it definitely doesn't have the same amount of grip as the Panos. The Panos is a very difficult car to slide out with, whereas with the Caparo, you definitely can. You can get it to fishtail, and if you start to lose control, it can certainly spin up its wheels. Whereas the Panos, it just doesn't really do that. The Toyota doesn't really either. So I wouldn't necessarily give it a full 10 for that. For top-end speed, they give it an 8. That seems a little bit generous. I'd probably go with a 7, because 205 is definitely fast. But again, there are plenty of cars that can destroy this in a straight line. Overall though, it's an incredible car, one which is featured on a surprisingly few games. But when it does show up, be it on Project Gotham or Forza 6, it's a great car to use. It's an experience, and even if you don't end up using it that much, it's a nice car to have in your arsenal. It's a true road-legal weapon. But that's it for this pick, of course. I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.